The Oracl Network.
Hey Warriors, take a listen to HLN's true crime series Sex and Murder. There's a new episode coming out this Sunday, September 5th. The episode is called Killer Sex Party. The case involves a gay porn actor whose screen name is Addison. Addison's real name is Jason Andrews, and he also was a DJ who went by the stage name DJ Veritas. I'm not really sure what Jason Andrews' preferred sexuality in real life is, but he did appear in gay porn for the gay adult entertainment website called Sean Cody. The true crime case he got himself mixed up in is bananas. Take a listen.
She was totally enamored, totally taken in.
He was a complete package.
They had a really good chemistry together. You could see it.
They become obsessed with each other.
Just a little.
So good.
And they start this love affair.
Then it turned into something much worse.
You see a figure face down on a massage table.
It sent chills down to my spine.
I'm investigating the murder of a student.
The hair on my arms is standing up now thinking about it.
It was a whodunit.
Is this revenge? Is this jealousy?
He was into some kinky stuff.
In the end, it was more twisted than anything Bonnie and Clyde ever really thought of.
No remorse, no conscience, no nothing.
Sunday at 10 on HLN. Set your DVRs now.
Be sure to check it out. The show is Sex and Murder, and the episode is titled Killer Sex Party. Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. Find me on the socials as Beyond the Rainbow on Facebook and Instagram, and Rainbow Crimes just about everywhere else. My website is beyondtherainbowpodcast.com. Today is day 13 that I've had COVID. But I gotta tell ya, I feel fantastic. I still have the cough a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. I think it's gonna be a little persistent thing. But other than that, I felt pretty damn good. I didn't get my shit together enough to present a missing but not forgotten segment this episode, but I will have another one ready to go for you next episode for sure. Should you be interested in doing the vocal part of a missing but not forgotten segment, let me know and I'll write it up and email it to you. All you have to do is record yourself reading what I've sent you and email it back to me. You don't need any fancy equipment. You can use your computer or phone to record. It's that simple. So be sure to DM me on the socials if you're interested. If you have DM'd me and I haven't responded, that means I didn't see it, because I always respond, even if it's someone pissed at me for some reason. So if that's the case, you DM me and I haven't responded, go to my website. From my website, you can send me an email, and they don't seem to go to spam, which is great. Which brings me to Michelle Pierce. Michelle, if you're still a listener, thank you for becoming a Patreon. I have to be honest, I had no idea I even had an active account. I want to refund you your money. Please contact me. I've emailed you and I've sent you snail mail. I gotta be honest, I really don't like Patreon because they don't communicate with me. The last time I checked, it said I did not have an active account, so I didn't worry about it. And then on a whim the other night I went and looked, And poor Michelle Pierce had been paying for like 4 months for a Beyond the Rainbow Patreon account that I didn't even know existed. So Michelle, like I said, please get in touch with me. I would also like to thank my last 2 5-star reviewers. Shaylee Miller said top notch with a cute little rainbow icon. And GDFFVSCGSXHF said love the show. My daughter came out to my wife and I. We love and support her. Keep up the good work, CJ. Reviews such as those are priceless, and they're very helpful in getting visibility for this show and to get these cases heard. I'd like to take a minute to share something with you that my friend and Rainbow Warrior Jan sent me. Jan is also the host of a true crime podcast called Wicked Crime South Africa. Jan was closing out one of his episodes that he had just recorded, and he made this blooper.
So until next time, stay safe, Wicked Warriors. So until next time, stay safe, Wicked Listeners.
The funniest part to me isn't that he called his listeners warriors, but that he gasped after he had done it. That just kind of cracked me up. Thanks for the laugh, Jan. Granttown, West Virginia had a population of just over 650 people in the year 2000. That's about how many seniors that were in my graduating class. The town's ethnic makeup was over 91% whites, 8% blacks, with that last percentage being Asian and mixed race. Granttown, West Virginia, a coal mining town until 1985. It has a volunteer fire department and 2 churches, one being a Methodist church and the other a Baptist church. Granttown, West Virginia. Folklore says a Bigfoot-type creature called Granttown Goon haunts the area. A sign on your way into town says, Granttown, growing progressive community. Granttown, West Virginia, where a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath home that has an updated kitchen and 1/3 of an acre of property is only $125,000. Granttown, West Virginia. CJ, why do you keep saying the town's name? Because, Rainbow Warriors, I'd like you to remember it. But maybe more important than remembering this town, I really would like you to remember the victim's name who was born, raised, and murdered here. Arthur Warren III, who went by J.R., was born in 1974. He was born to the less than 8% of black families in this town. J.R. was born with a birth defect, causing him to be missing some fingers on one of his hands. J.R. also had some learning disabilities. His family belonged to the Baptist church, and J.R. would regularly attend church services with his family. J.R.'s favorite thing to do at church was to sing. Granttown is a small enough town where the 2 highest populated races could definitely meld together better. Although hostilities weren't apparent between the whites and blacks, it seemed that they did live somewhat divided. The blacks lived in the flat terrain near Pawpaw Creek, and the whites lived in the wealthier neighborhoods that were on the hillside. Due to J.R.'s learning disabilities, he went to a school outside of Granttown. The school was specialized just for children with learning disabilities. Every single day when J.R. would get home from school, he'd walk around town looking to start up a conversation with someone. Anyone. It didn't matter who. At the age of 16, J.R. would come out as gay to his family. And you might think, oh no, his family are Baptist. Probably Southern Baptist. This isn't going to be good for J.R. But rather than berate him for living his truth, his family embraced him for who he was. J.R. was a good boy. He was kind and helpful. He was his family's own personal cheerleader. When he'd see his mother, he'd smile and his eyes would sparkle and he'd say,
"Hey, Ma, you're so pretty. Ain't my mama pretty?"
As the years ticked by, J.R. grew into a man's body, but still he remained childlike mentally. He was 26, he lived with his folks, and he yearned for friendship. I imagine for someone who needs more social outlets, living in a tiny town such as this could be very stifling. J.R. was lonely, and as I said, he would talk to whoever he could as often as he could. At the age of 26, J.R. had a curfew. He was to be home by 12:30 a.m. Having no car and nothing to do in a little town that rolled up its sidewalks when the sun went down, you would think that task would be easy to accomplish. But J.R. roamed the streets of Granttown in the daylight and in the dark. It didn't matter to him. He was seeking friendships, conversations, attention he hungered for. If he found a conversation, he might not get home in time for his curfew. Some of the townsfolks didn't take too kindly to J.R.'s sweet and friendly nature. They'd whisper behind his back,
"There goes that black faggot son of a bitch. He better never hurt any of my kids."
J.R. had never hurt anyone. For them to say that about him was uncalled for. But then again, a small town sometimes breeds small town thinking. There's not much more we can say about that. The evening of July 3rd, 2000, J.R. was on one of his many daily walks through town. He was passing a home and he saw 3 teenage boys he knew. They weren't J.R.'s friends, really, but they all knew each other. They'd known each other for years, actually, and they had hung out together before. The 3 boys were all white. 17-year-old David Parker, 17-year-old Jared Wilson, and 15-year-old Jason Shoemaker. The boys were painting a house, and while they were painting, they had been drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and huffing gasoline. J.R. hung out with them and was talking to them. After a while, the boys told J.R. to go, and not to come back until he brought them cigarettes, condoms, porn, and his Xanax. Xanax is used to treat anxiety and panic disorders. It works in a body's central nervous system as a relaxant. The boys knew J.R. had a prescription for Xanax, so J.R. left and he went home. He told his mom he was going to watch fireworks with friends, and he left the house again. This was about 11:30 p.m. J.R.'s mom reminded him he needed to be home by 12:30 for his curfew. J.R. returned to the teenagers with cigarettes and his Xanax tablets. The boys crushed up the Xanax and they snorted it. Within an hour or so, J.R. had somehow worn out his welcome with these 3 kids. David Parker started to accuse J.R. of spreading rumors they had sex together. J.R. had no idea what David was talking about. He denied the accusations, but David insisted, and his attack became physical. Soon David and Jared were hitting and kicking J.R., and the 15-year-old Jason was cheering his friends on. David and Jared were both wearing steel-toed boots, so each kick they delivered to J.R. was double the delivery and damage it would have been with a regular boot. But for these 2 boys, beating the shit out of J.R. wasn't enough for them. J.R. lay on the ground. He couldn't stand by himself. So the boys dragged J.R. out to David's car, a red Camaro, and they shoved J.R. into the back seat. Jared got into the back with J.R. David sat in the driver's seat, and the 15-year-old Jason rode shotgun. A very bloodied-up J.R. cried, and he pleaded for the boys to take him home. But this wasn't going to happen. The teenage boys drove J.R. to the edge of town. J.R. was in and out of consciousness. When he was lucid, J.R. was still asking to go home to his mama. The quick several-minute drive seemed to take forever this night. Finally, David pulled over and he put the car in park. Jared pulled J.R. out of the back seat with him and he stretched him out on the ground near the side of the road. Jared then moved out of the way and crossed the street to the other side. With David still driving and Jason next to him, David ran J.R. over. Not just once, not twice, but 4 times until J.R. was certainly dead. The boys planned to make J.R.'s death appear like a hit and run. Jared hopped into the back seat again, and David took off towards home. The boys spent the next couple of hours cleaning up any possible traces of blood they could find, and then they burned their clothing in a burn bin in the backyard. David concluded the evening by huffing more gasoline that was used to burn the clothing. The following day, 4th of July, America's celebration of Independence Day, J.R.'s parents awoke to find him not in his bed. They figured he must have slept over one of the boys' homes that he was hanging out with the night before. A little later that morning, the police chief arrived at J.R.'s home to talk to his parents. He asked J.R.'s parents what time their son had left the house the night of July 3rd. When they responded, he told them their son was dead and he had already ID'd J.R. J.R.'s parents felt that this was a very cold and callous way of presenting the news of their son's death. The reason the chief of police might have been so nonchalant about presenting J.R.'s death to his folks was because he had just warned J.R.'s mother not to allow J.R. to roam the streets by himself in the dark. J.R.'s mom had insisted that J.R. was a grown man, and it wasn't illegal to take walks at whatever hour he chose to do so. And that's because J.R.'s mom knew that J.R. was always antsy. He always had an abundance of energy that needed to be released. All the walking for J.R. was good for him. A newspaper courier who was out for deliveries was the one that found J.R.'s body. It was about 5:30 a.m. he made the discovery. J.R. had apparently been struck by a car in the middle of the night in a hit-and-run accident. That was the initial ruling, until a little later that morning, when 15-year-old Jason Shoemaker told his mother everything that had happened the previous night. He told her what had happened with David, Jared, himself, and J.R. He did this even though David had threatened to kill him if he told anyone. Jason decided to take the high road and he told his mom. His mom called the sheriff's department with the information that her son had just told her. This hit-and-run accident was now being classified as an active homicide investigation. Later that day on July 4th, David Parker and Jared Wilson were picked up in the next town. The boys were arrested as they were enjoying the Independence Day celebration with their families. 15-year-old Jason was also arrested. J.R.'s family wanted the boys to be charged with a hate crime, but as always, law enforcement did not believe the murder was a hate crime. No sexual orientation motive, not racially motivated, and not learning disabled motivated. I'm starting to believe cops must get paid extra to say things aren't hate crimes. It's almost like a knee-jerk response. I think it's a hate crime. No, it's not. How about if we just take a moment or two to investigate further before giving any immediate decision? Not that the state of West Virginia in the year of 2000 would have done anything different had it been declared a hate crime. I do think it's important to note those same townsfolk who would talk shit under their breaths about J.R., when he died, they started to say the sweetest things about him. Interesting how a tragedy can turn people's opinions so quickly. In court, David pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. But here's the defense that David and his attorneys came up with at the trial. They presented J.R. had been giving David drugs and alcohol since David was 10 years old. And then they said that J.R. would sexually assault and rape David. David claimed this went on for over 5 years, and it happened probably about 30 times. I don't know about you, warriors, but I have a really hard time believing this is true. And normally I would side on behalf of a victim who claimed this. But if this were true, Why would this boy wait 7 years since the supposed first sexual attack by J.R. to even mention it? Why would this boy still socialize with J.R.? To me, it sounds like a completely fabricated excuse to save his ass. Jared pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He also tried to use J.R. gave me alcohol and drugs too, and he raped me 6 times in the past 5 years. But then Jared said he did beat and kick J.R. because he was scared of his friend David. He said he didn't have anything to do with putting J.R. on the side of the road and running him over. This was Jared, the very one who pulled J.R. from the back seat and laid him on the side of the road. Jason was charged with assisting to cover up a crime. He received the lightest penalty, and he served several years in a juvenile facility. And I also think that his sentence was much lighter because he came forward with the truth. Jared, who was tried as an adult, was sentenced to 15 years for second-degree murder. I believe he's out now and living as a free man. David, the owner and driver of the red Camaro, he was also tried as an adult. And he too was sentenced to 15 years for first-degree murder. David appealed to the courts in 2002. He claimed he had ineffective counsel. He claimed that his mental capacity was not taken into account at the time of the trial, and he also felt that his sentence was excessive. He gave J.R. the death sentence, which to me is extremely excessive, David. The court ended up denying David's appeal. So David went in front of the parole board in 2016. This was after 14 years of his 15 years served. David was denied parole. After he was denied, he applied a petition of appeal again, this time against the court, again stating ineffective counsel, disproportionate sentencing, and he claimed that the parole board was violating his due process and liberties. He also tried to say that his initial guilty plea was made involuntarily. Again, the court system denied his appeal. With the court being so strict on David Allen Parker, I do believe some unicorn justice is actually happening for J.R. Here's the thing, David. The parole panel doesn't give two shits about you feeling your civil rights were violated. They just want you to feel some remorse for your actions. They want you to feel guilty and bad about what you did to J.R. And until that day happens, enjoy your time in the West Virginia penitentiary, you dumbass. J.R.'s dad has since passed away, and he's joined his son in heaven. I know some of you don't believe in heaven. For me, I like to believe there's a heaven and a place where we can regroup with our loved ones again. It helps me deal with death a little bit easier. As for J.R.'s mom, she continues to sing and is very active in her church in Granttown. Rest in power, J.R. This episode's quickie case happened in Oregon, May of this year, and there's not near enough information as to why this crime even happened. So I'm going to throw down what we have on the case, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on it as time goes on. 17-year-old trans boy Ollie Taylor was a senior at Gervais High School. Ollie, who was sometimes called Oliver, was born as Molly Taylor. Ollie was adorable, and one trait that really stood out with Ollie was his need to make sure his friends were all okay. Even if he was struggling with something in life, it brought Ollie comfort to know that they were going to be okay. And Ollie was always a great listener for a friend who needed to talk. He was a member of his school's Future Farmers of America program. It's also called the FFA. He was a gifted artist, and he loved to draw, paint, and write poetry. Ollie also loved to skateboard. His board was covered with decals, including LGBTQ+ and pride stickers. As well as the FFA, Ollie was also a member of his high school's track and field team. He was a bundle of energy. and his nickname was Taz for the Tasmanian Devil cartoon character. Ollie could bring forth a 30-minute conversation and have it all out and be gone in 4 minutes. He was insightful, intelligent, and he was also a contradiction on many levels. 1 minute he would tornado in and spin away with all his energy, and the next moment you would see him sitting quietly, gently petting and talking to his prize lambs. For reasons I need to be able to understand and I cannot publicly find information on, Ollie was abducted on May 12th of this year. It was around 4:45 in the afternoon, just 3 days after Mother's Day. He was abducted in Gervais, Oregon from someone's home. It's not clear if it was his home or his friend Eric's home, or even the home of someone else. Gervais, Oregon is just north of Salem. Ollie was taken by a 20-year-old man named Kenneth Pedden III. Kenneth shot Eric in the abdomen when Eric tried to stop him from taking Ollie. Kenneth got Ollie into his Ford 150 pickup truck, and he drove southeast on the 214 towards Silverton, Oregon. Eric was able to get to a phone and call to get help for his gunshot wound. He told the arriving police about Ollie's abduction. Law enforcement got onto the scent of Kenneth's pickup truck, and a pursuit followed. Officers from Silverton Police and Marion County Sheriff soon joined the chase. The Ford pickup finally came to a stop on Highway 214 near Forest Ridge Road. Kenneth, the driver of the truck, opened fire on law enforcement. The law enforcement officers fired back. Kenneth eventually gave up to law enforcement, while a critically injured Ollie lay bleeding in the truck. Ollie was transported all the way to a children's hospital in Portland. 1 week later, Ollie died from his injuries in the hospital. After Ollie's death, police came out publicly, and they said these 3 things. Number 1, neither Kenneth nor Ollie were struck by any bullets from any officer's guns. Number 2, no officers were injured in the gunfire. Number 3, the shootings and kidnapping was not a random thing. But yet they won't say what the relationship between Kenneth, Ollie, and Eric were. 3 of the officers involved were put on administrative leave while an investigation into their actions ensued. A grand jury came back and said that all 3 officers were justified in the force they used. This is extremely concerning to me. The police say that Ollie wasn't struck by their bullets, but where's his autopsy report? It's not available to see exactly what type of bullet was lodged into him. And even if Ollie didn't die by their bullet, the fact that they would fire into a truck knowing a 17-year-old victim is in that vehicle, that's fucking scary. Is that what they're being trained to do? I try to imagine my daughter being abducted and law enforcement firing into the vehicle that she's in. It makes me livid. What the ever-loving fuck are these cops doing? What if their pressure is what put Ollie's life in danger in the first place? Had they hung back and maybe had attained a hostage negotiator or someone with training who could have talked Kenneth down from the situation, would Ollie still be alive? Kenneth is being charged with the first-degree murder of Ollie and first-degree kidnapping. But there's been no word as to when his trial will actually begin. Unless solid proof arises that the bullet used was for sure Kenneth's, I'm pretty sure I know what his defense will be. He's gonna say it was a cop's bullet that killed Ollie. It's been 4 months since Ollie's murder. There should be more answers out in the public by now. Ollie's family have said that they don't want anyone being angry over this, because Ollie wouldn't have wanted anyone to waste their energy on anger, but instead put your energies towards doing something positive for someone. Well, that's very stoic and noble. I'm pissed off over this senseless murder. It also proves to me that law enforcement needs continual training for all types of situations they encounter. As I said, I'll try to keep you posted as I find out more information about this case. Rest in power, Ollie. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay. Unless you're a murderer.